Today's subject is the High Priestess tarot card, and we will examine its everyday symbolism within a reading and also take a look at its deeper Kabbalistic symbolism. The High Priestess card involves knowledge, hidden knowledge, secrets, and intuition and psychic ability. Now, there are different interpretations of the card. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but each time you get a new deck and you get a new tarot book, there's a different interpretation. But basically, at its most basic, the High Priestess involves knowledge, hidden knowledge, and intuition and psychic ability. Now, the exact interpretation of the card depends on the context and the cards around it. For example, the High Priestess involves knowledge, education, and science. Let's say that you're thinking about going back to school. The High Priestess could be a positive sign. However, if you get the card reversed, it would have the opposite meaning, and that could be a negative sign. Let's say that you're in a court case. You're going through a divorce, you're going to court. The High Priestess has to do with hidden matters and hidden knowledge. The High Priestess could have to do with hidden evidence or hidden knowledge coming to the surface, secrets being made known. Especially if you get the Justice card or the Judgment card in a reading, because justice is connected to legal matters. Let's say that you're doing a reading about love and romance. The High Priestess could refer to a mysterious woman. Or if you are a woman, that could refer to you being mysterious and unobtainable. The High Priestess involves hidden knowledge. If you get a bunch of court cards in a reading, court cards represent people. Court cards include kings, queens, pages, and knights. Or in some decks, kings, queens, prince, and princesses. Court cards represent people. And if you get a bunch of court cards, it could represent a group of people. And if you get the High Priestess in that reading, that could represent secrets or something hidden within the group. It could represent hidden knowledge, gossip, intrigue. And also the moon is connected to that. So it depends on what the context. So if you're doing a reading for love, it would have a different meaning as you doing a reading for going back to college. A different meaning for if you're facing a decision or whatever the case may be. If you're facing a decision in the Rider-Waite tarot deck, there are different versions of the card. Here's the Rider-Waite version, which is really popular, what I use a lot. The Rider-Waite shows two pillars on each side of the High Priestess. So you have two pillars, the black pillar, Boaz, and the white pillar, Yakin. So she sits in between two pillars. The two pillars, Yakin and Boaz, could represent two options. Let's say that you're facing a decision. Let's say you're trying to make a choice, a decision. The two pillars could represent two options, and you're trying to make a choice. And you may be weighing these two options in your mind. What the High Priestess tells you is that instead you're in between two choices. Instead of weighing these two things logically, the High Priestess tells you to withdraw from the situation and listen to your inner voice. What does your inner voice, what does your intuition tell you? And the High Priestess is connected to your intuition and to the moon. But basically, the High Priestess involves hidden knowledge, intuition, and listening to your inner voice, and hidden knowledge. And now we get to the deeper esoteric Kabbalistic symbolism. In the Kabbalah, in your Western occult Kabbalah, in the Kabbalah, the 22 trump cards, or 22 major arcana, are connected to the 22 Hebrew letters. And the 22 Hebrew letters and the 22 trump cards are connected to the 22 paths on the Kabbalistic tree of life. The Kabbalistic tree of life is a glyph in the Kabbalah that represents the attributes of the divine. It could represent the forces within the psyche and the forces within the universe. Now here is the Kabbalistic tree of life. You have 10 spheres, 10 sephirot, and these are the attributes of the psyche or of the divine or of the cosmos. And you have 22 paths. These 22 paths represent relationships between the sephirot. And the High Priestess card is connected to the Hebrew letter Gimel. The Hebrew letter Gimel. And the Hebrew letter Gimel connects Tiferet to Keter. So Gimel in the High Priestess is this path right here in between Tiferet and Keter. Tiferet and Keter. Now the Hebrew letter Gimel means camel in Hebrew, and the Hebrew letter Gimel is connected to the number 3. Now, in Hebrew, there are no numbers in Hebrew. In Hebrew, the letters are numbers. Therefore, the Hebrew letter Gimel could either be the letter G or the number 3. So the Hebrew letter Gimel is ascribed the number 3. And in this version, the Hebrew letter Gimel and the High Priestess card is connected to the moon. Now, why is the moon connected to the number 3? Well, the moon, you have the increase, the waxing phase of the moon, where the moon is growing and increasing, and then it stops at the full moon, the midway point, and then the moon decreases and wanes. So the moon, you have increase, the full moon, and decrease. And then the new moon, it pauses again and then increase. So you have increasing and decreasing. You have creation and destruction, expansion and contraction. And then you have the midway point, which could be symbolized by the full or the dark moon. So with the moon, you have the number 3. And the moon is a symbol of travel or movement or change, because the moon is always changing. The phases of the moon are always changing through the cycles of life, through the phases of growth, maturity, decay, and death. So the moon is always changing, and so you have this idea of movement. Now the Hebrew letter Gimel is Hebrew for camel, and a camel is a mode of transportation. For example, a camel will get you through the desert. So a camel is a mode of transportation and movement. So the Hebrew letter Gimel is ascribed to the High Priestess card and the path and the tree of life between Keter and Tiferet. Now here is the Hebrew letter Gimel. The Hebrew letter Gimel shows a Vav and a Yud for a foot. It's the hieroglyph of someone walking. And so you have a Vav representing someone standing, and you have a Vav and a Yud for a foot. So it's a hieroglyph of someone standing with one foot out, like walking or running. And so in the Hebrew letter Gimel, you have someone standing with one foot out, like walking or running. And the Hebrew letter for walk is ratz, which is connected to the Hebrew word ratzon, which means will or willpower. So you have the Hebrew letter Gimel is a hieroglyph of someone walking or running, and the Hebrew letter Gimel means camel. So you have the idea of movement or travel. And as I said, the Hebrew letter Gimel connects Tiferet to Keter. This path right here is the High Priestess, or Gimel. And it crosses what is this line right here known as the abyss. The abyss. So this line right here is called the abyss. And the abyss separates the 3 higher sephirot, which are Keter, Chokmah, and Binah, from the 7 lower sephirot of Chesed, Gebura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkut. So the abyss separates the higher Sephirot from the lower seven. And in the Rider-Waite Tarot, it shows the High Priestess sitting in between two pillars of Jachin and Boaz, and behind her is the veil or curtain with 7 pomegranates on the veil or screening curtain. The abyss in the Kabbalah separates your everyday mundane self from your divine consciousness. So the abyss could be seen as the gulf, the separation between man and the unknowable Godhead. Now, in the New Age community and the occult community, a lot of people don't like the idea of separation or exile, separation from God. In the Kabbalah, this is a gulf in our consciousness. It is a separation from God in our consciousness. It is a crisis in consciousness. And the goal, the ultimate goal, is to cross the abyss, to cross the gulf in between man and the noble Godhead. Now, while the lower Sephirot also are representations of the divine attributes, these are more easily accessed within your everyday mundane consciousness. While Keter, that's kind of hard for our minds to grasp. So this abyss, this gulf, this dividing line exists between man and the unknowable Godhead. Now, this isn't always the case. For example, at a psychological level, Chokmah could represent your burst of inspiration, and Binah could represent your analytical thinking and logic, analyzing it. So this isn't always the case, but basically the abyss, Aleister Crowley said that the abyss separates the phenomenal world of manifestation from its source. So the High Priestess card, in its Kabbalistic meaning, and the Hebrew letter Gimel, connects our everyday self from our higher self. And Tiferet is the heart, your spiritual heart. And so you have this idea of this veil behind her, which is called parokhet in the Kabbalah. Now, parokhet in Hebrew means veil or curtain, a separating curtain. In King Solomon's temple, you had a separating veil or screening curtain, which separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple. So the Holy of Holies, which had the Ark of the Covenant, the representation of God's presence on earth, the Holy of Holies was separated in King Solomon's temple from the rest of the temple, or Hekal. So you have the two pillars in King Solomon's temple and the veil, which separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple. And in your modern day synagogue, they have the parokhet or curtain, which screens off the Torah ark, the Torah scrolls, the Aron Chodesh, which represents God's presence on earth. And in your modern synagogue, they will rend the veil. And when the Kohen picks up the Torah scrolls, the Jews in the congregation stand in respect for God's presence on earth. And when the Kohen set the Torah scrolls down, you're allowed to sit. So the veil or screening curtain in Judaism and in the Kabbalah represents the dividing line between divine consciousness and everyday human consciousness. Now, in the Kabbalistic deeper symbolism of the High Priestess card, at her feet is the moon, and her robes turn into water. And so you have the idea of the moon. Now, what is the moon a symbol of? The moon is receptive. The moon represents darkness and what's hidden. It has to do with dreams, intuition, imagination. And these are all aspects of the subconscious mind. So the idea is that your unconscious, subconscious mind is a bridge, a gateway between the unknowable Godhead and your heart or your mundane consciousness. So Gimel and the High Priestess bridges the gap between the unknowable Godhead and your everyday mundane self through the aspect of your subconscious mind, so that we all get those gut instincts. We all have intuition, inspiration. We all have dreams. And the idea is that your dreams, intuition, these cross the abyss so that messages could come from the other side. Sometimes you get bursts of inspiration, intuition. You get messages and dreams. And the idea is that these are messages from across the abyss through the medium of the subconscious mind. Now back to the everyday, mundane meaning of the tarot card and a spread. The High Priestess card, when doing a reading, has to do with knowledge, hidden knowledge, and listening to your inner voice, your intuition, your gut instincts. What does your inner voice tell you? Perhaps from across the abyss, the veil, which separates your everyday ego from your unknown self. Now, how does the High Priestess card compare to other cards in the tarot deck? How does the High Priestess card compare to the Magician? The Magician represents conscious creation. So the Magician tarot card is conscious creation, connected to the Hebrew letter Beit and Mercury. Now the Hebrew letter Beit starts off the Torah, Bereshit, in the beginning, Beit. So the Hebrew letter Beit is the first word in the Bible, Bereshit, in the beginning. And also bara, create, creation. So with the Hebrew letter Beit in the Magician card, you have the idea of creation and beginnings. So beginnings, creation. And the Hebrew letter Beit with the Magician card starts off the Torah. Bereshit bara Elohim v'shamim v'charetz. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So while the Magician represents conscious creation, the High Priestess represents receptivity to your inner voice. Now, how does the High Priestess card compare with the Empress? The Empress is the earthly mother. The Empress gives you material birth, while the High Priestess gives you spiritual birth into higher knowledge. How does the High Priestess card compare with the Hierophant? The Hierophant represents religion for the masses. It represents church, religion for everyone. The exoteric dogma of the church is the Hierophant. Whereas the High Priestess refers to hidden, secret, mystical knowledge. So you have exoteric and esoteric. How does the High Priestess compare to the Hermit? The Hermit is a seeker of wisdom. He holds the lamp. He's seeking hidden knowledge. The High Priestess, on the other hand, represents the bestower of knowledge. She is the librarian of knowledge. She holds the Torah scrolls in her hand. She is the holder of knowledge. She's the bestower, the librarian of knowledge. And so some people like to compare cards with each other. So she has the two pillars. She holds the scroll. This cross represents Tiferet and her crown Keter. So her robes turn into water and the moon. She has the scrolls of hidden knowledge. And behind her is the veil or curtain with the 7 lower sephirot. And that is a look at the deeper Kabbalistic symbolism of the High Priestess and also its meaning within a tarot spread. So the High Priestess is knowledge and your inner voice, intuition. What does your inner voice tell you from the other side of the dividing line? So anyways, that is one way to look at it. There are different ways to look at the card. There's different ways to look at the High Priestess. For example, an older form of the spread has the papes. So while I'm using the Rider-Waite deck, some decks have the papes, the female pope, which is a reference to Pope Joan, the medieval legend of the female pope. So there are different ways of looking at the card, different ways of looking at it, but basically that is the High Priestess card, and that is its everyday mundane meaning in a tarot spread and its deeper esoteric symbolism.